Hello all, Joseph here, and we've come to week 3 of my deck tech series covering the Ravnica guilds. That puts us in Dimir, with blue and black colors. Now, one particular commander that caught my eye is Devourer of Memory. Devourer of Memory is a 2/1 nightmare for a blue and black that has the ability, whenever one or more cards are put into your graveyard from your library, Devourer of Memory gets +1/+1 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. It also has pay 1 blue black, and put the top card of your library into your graveyard. So we've got a few interesting things on this commander. First, I want to note a very important phrase, this one or more. This means that Devourer of Memory is not counting the number of cards going into our graveyard, it's counting the number of triggers. Second, that pump and unblockable status our commander gets ends at the end of every single turn. So to really get the most out of our commander, we're going to need multiple separate effects sending cards from our library to our graveyard. We're going to need them every turn, and we're going to need to have them trigger before blockers are declared. I also really like that our commander's second ability fuels its first, but it's a little mana expensive, so we're going to look for cheaper options. So, what are our goals for this deck? We are going to mill ourselves and then take advantage of that with our unblockable commander and support it with a deck designed to take advantage of our large graveyard. Now, one quick side note. When looking at this deck, there's one card that fits the bill perfectly. Persistent Petitioners. Persistent Petitioners is a 1/3 human advisor for 1 and a blue that has pay 1 and tap, target player mills 1. And it also has tap 4 untapped advisors you control, target player mills 12. And finally, it has a deck can have any number of cards named Persistent Petitioners. So this card is 2 mana, sturdy with that 3 toughness, and we only need to spend 1 to mill ourselves for 1. Now that second ability isn't really relevant for us, but with that third ability, we could pack this deck with as many Persistent Petitioners as we want. However, I recently saw that this card is about $2 on TCG Player. So adding even 3 or 4 Petitioners caused a huge increase in the price of the deck. For that reason, I've chosen to exclude this card for the sake of budget. But if you want to spend a little more, then this is the card to choose. Now, onto the deck. I'm not going to spend much time on ramp. Our commander is only 2 mana, and our deck runs extraordinarily low to the ground. Most spells about 2 mana. But there are a few cards that I want to mention. The first is Deranged Assistant, a 1/1 human wizard for 1 and a blue, that has a tap, mill card, add a colorless mana. This is going to be a mana dork that also gets us an all-important mill trigger, so we want both of these effects, making it a win-win for us. Once our commander is unblockable, we can swing in and use Explorer's Scope. Explorer's Scope is an equipment for 1 mana and with Equip 1, and whenever equipped creature attacks, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you can put it onto the battlefield tapped. So this is going to get any lands sitting on top of our libraries, as well as give us a peek at what's on top, which is important in case we don't want to mill it away. But what about all those lands that do end up in our graveyards? We're going to be milling ourselves a lot, and all of that mana is going to be going to waste. Well, for that, we've got Scaretiller. Scaretiller is a 1/4 Scarecrow for 4 mana that has, whenever Scaretiller becomes tapped, you can either put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield, or you can return target land from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So this is going to get all of those lands out of our graveyard so we can put them to better use. Now this deck is going to care more about utilizing our large graveyard than drawing off the library, but we do have a few straight to draw cards. The first is going to be Deep Analysis, a sorcery for 3 and a blue that has target player draws 2 cards. It also has a flashback for 1 and a blue and also 3 life. So that way we can cast it even if we mill it. We also have effects like Pilfered Plans, another sorcery for 1 blue-black that has target player mills 2 and then we draw 2 cards. So this spell is going to get us card advantage as well as our necessary mill trigger. But speaking of our mill, let's talk about our options and how we can do that consistently. First up, we have the tap creatures, and we have a lot of them. The archetype for this is going to be Cathartic Adept, a 1/1 wizard for a blue mana that has tap, target player mills 1. Pretty simple, no bells, no whistles, it does exactly what we need, and that's all. We also have several variations on this, including Sinister Starfish, Merfolk Mesmerist, and even Screeching Sliver. But all of those are creatures with tap effects, vulnerable to getting removed or interfered with. Or at the very least, we have to remember to activate them. So what about cards where we don't have to think, they just automatically happen? For that, we've got cards like Jace's Erasure and Curse of the Bloody Tome. Jace's Erasure is an enchantment for 1 and a blue that has, whenever you draw a card, target player mills 1. Curse of the Bloody Tome is an aura curse for 2 and a blue that has, at the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, that player mills 2. Now, normally you'd see strategies using these cards to affect other players, but here we're going to use them to mill ourselves for just a few cards, right at the start of every turn, and making sure that our commander gets that unblockable status immediately. But now that we've got our commander unblockable, how are we going to take advantage of that? The easiest thing to do would be to suit up our commander with a lot of equipment and just do a basic Voltron Bulldozer strategy with Armory of Iroas. Armory of Iroas is an equipment for 2 mana that has Equip 2, and whenever equipped creature attacks, put a +1 counter on it. So this is going to put a counter on our commander every time that it swings. And using just our commander's second ability as well as this, we could close out a game by just slowly growing it and taking out our opponents. But I've never been one for the quick and easy strategy. Where's the jank? Where's the flair? And so in that interest, I've actually put less emphasis on our commander damage and more on some very interesting cards that just happen to care about making contact with our opponents. For example, we've got Sigil of Sleep, an aura enchantment for a blue mana that has whenever enchanted creature deals damage to a player, return target creature that player controls to its owner's hand. We also have Helm of the Gas Lord, another aura enchantment for 3 and a Dimir that has, so long as that creature is blue, it gets +1/+1, and whenever it deals damage to an opponent, draw a card. And so long as it's black, it gets +1/+1, and whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, that player discards a card. But then I was reminded of an even stranger card effect I had never really found a home for: Cipher. Cipher is an ability on instants or sorceries that says, after you cast this card, then you may exile this spell card encoded on a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. Now, because our commander is unblockable, we can cipher spells onto it and then get a guaranteed recast every single turn. And for this effect, I've chosen to include Last Thoughts, Hidden Strings, and Hands of Binding. Last Thoughts is very simple, it's a sorcery that just allows us to draw a card. Hidden Strings is a sorcery that allows us to tap or untap up to 2 target permanents, and Hands of Binding will allow us to tap down any target creature our opponent controls, and it won't untap at their next untap step. With these cards ciphered onto our commander, it can deliver a payload of effects every time it makes contact. Even better, these cards exist in exile, so unlike auras, they can't be targeted. The only way to remove them is to remove our commander. Speaking of, how are we going to protect him? He's a 2/1 unless he's pumped, leaving him extremely delicate to any kind of non-combat damage. An easy thing to do would be to just slap on Alexi's Cloak and call it a day. Alexi's Cloak is an enchantment for 1 and a blue that we can play at instant speed and says enchanted creature has Shroud. But here's where the double-edged sword of Shroud comes in. We put this on our commander and we can't cast any more of our spells that take advantage of its unblockability. No auras, no ciphers, nothing. Now, Alexi's Cloak can be put on after we've suited up our commander, but what if we haven't done that yet? Well then, we can look at temporary protection, such as Dive Down, an instant for a blue mana that says target creature you control gets +0/+3 and gains hexproof until end of turn. But the even better form of protection here is going to be Regenerate. For that we've got Soul Channeling, an enchantment for 2 and a black that says pay 2 life, regenerate enchanted creature. Soul Channeling is going to be one of the most powerful forms of protection we can use, because its cost is life, not mana. Kill spell, 2 life. Board wipe, 2 life. Need to use our commander as a blocker, pay 2 life. So unless our opponents are really able to pressure us hard, this one spell will be able to keep our commander afloat for the whole game. Finally, we have Nurok Stealth Suit. Nurok Stealth Suit is an equipment for 2 mana that gives equipped creatures Shroud. It also has pay blue and attach Nurok Stealth Suit to target creature you control. So the nice thing about this card is that it gives the lasting protection that we want, but it can also be moved elsewhere whenever we need to suit up our commander. And just in case our opponents want to sneak in a kill spell while our commander is unprotected, We can use that attach cost to instantly cover our commander again. Now, all this time we've been milling ourselves constantly in order to trigger our commander, but how can we make the most out of this graveyard that we're filling? First off, we got cards that care about the size of our graveyard, such as Spontaneous Mutation, an enchantment for blue mana that has flash and enchanted creature gets -X/-O, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard. We've also got Ghastly Demise, an instant for a black mana that says destroy target non-black creature if its toughness is less than or equal to the number of cards in your graveyard. But more importantly, we've got creatures with abilities we can activate from the graveyard and take advantage of them. First up is First Sphere Gargantua, a 5/4 horror for 4 black that has when First Sphere Gargantua enters the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. It also has Unearth for 2 and a black, where we can return this card from our graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, but exile it at the beginning of the next end step, or if it would leave the battlefield. It also can activate only at sorcery speed. Unearth is very limited. Because it can only be activated at sorcery speed and the creatures exiled at the end of turn, we can't use these creatures as blockers. They have to be attackers. And First Sphere Gargantua fulfills this perfectly. Its high power means we're going to force our opponents to trade creatures or else take a lot of damage. And in a pinch, it does work as a late game card draw, which is never a bad thing. We also got to disturb creatures like Bait Hook Angler, a 2/1 human peasant for 1 and a blue that has Disturb, pay 1 and a blue. We can cast this card from our graveyard transformed, at which point it becomes Hook Haunt Drifter, a 1/2 flyer with, if it would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So Disturb lets us cast an alternative form of our creature out of our graveyard, and is an improvement over Unearth because the disturbed creature sticks around. However, it still has the disadvantage that the new creature will be exiled if it leaves play. So for more reliable recursion, we're going to have to look at Escape. With that, we have Tizerius Charger, a 3/2 Pegasus for 2 and a black that has Escape, pay 4 and a black, and exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. And Tizerius Charger escapes with your choice of a +1 counter or a flying counter on it. So Escape abilities allow us to remove excess dead weight from our graveyards in return for getting back one of our creatures. And Tizerius Charger is modal, so we could pump it to be a more effective attacker, or we could give it evasion with flying. So Tizerius Charger is going to be a repeatable blocker for creatures on the ground or in the air, and is going to be a major headache for our opponents. But we have lots of creatures in our deck that can't recur themselves. How are we going to take advantage of them? We have a few one-shot cards like Forever Young, which is a sorcery for 1 and a black that has put any number of target creature cards from your graveyard on top of a library. Then draw a card. So we can play this mid or late game and not get back just one creature, but literally every one that we want. We even get to stack the top of the library however we choose. And on top of that, we draw one. We do, though, have to be careful not to mill away the other creatures that we just put on top of our library. The more effective recursion ability, though, is going to be Midnight Recovery, a sorcery for 3 and a black that has return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. It is also another Cipher card, allowing us to then get another creature from our graveyard back to hand every time our commander connects for damage. And with our commander, we are going to be connecting every turn. So, how do we win with this deck? We're going to use an army of recurring creatures to keep our opponents at bay while we take them out with unblockable commander damage. And in case our commander gets hated off the board and the cost becomes too high, we need to have some backup commanders. For that, we've got 2 Infiltrators, Dimir Infiltrator and Benthic Infiltrator. Dimir Infiltrator is a 1/3 spirit for a blue and a black that cannot be blocked, but it also has Transmute. So for this, we can pay 1 blue-black and discard this card and use it to tutor for any 2-mana card that we want. Benthic Infiltrator is a 1/4 Eldrazi drone for 2 and a blue that can't be blocked, and it also has Ingest. So whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles the top card of their library. So with this ability, whenever it connects, we're siphoning the cards off the top of our opponent's library, potentially denying them their best cards. Now, there aren't many pump spells in black or blue that I would consider worth a slot in this deck, but feast your eyes on this. This is Soul Shriek, an instant for black mana that has a target creature you control gets +X/+O until end of turn, where X is equal to the number of creature cards in your library. Then sacrifice that card. So this single card can make our commander just explode with damage. Picture this. We're in a multiplayer game. we want to focus down one enemy before turning on the other. That's just common sense. So in that event, that other player is going to get cocky because they haven't taken any commander damage, and they can probably see all of our sources of self-mill and therefore be able to calculate how big our commander can get. So they think they have time, they can whittle us down. We use this mid or late game and we can easily one-shot any opponent we set our eyes on. Sure, we're going to have to recast our commander afterwards, but he's cheap and we will have already taken out our biggest threat. And then we will just begin the whole cycle over again. And that is our Devourer of Memory deck. It's got a few more moving parts than your typical Voltron strategy, but I think it will be very rewarding and very fun to play. And those are what we care about more than anything. Please like and subscribe, and remember to come back next week when we will be covering our next commander, which is going to be in Golgari.